What if everything you inherited was already on the verge of being taken away? Before she even knew how to spell her own name, the land had already whispered it into the trees, into the riverbeds, into the red soil soaked in silence and secrets. She was only a child then, a girl with wide, wondering eyes and a silence too heavy for her years, standing barefoot at the edge of 2 wooden coffins and a shallow grave. Rain poured like grief from the sky, and the village, cloaked in shadow. And superstition murmured behind her. They never said it aloud, but the air carried it. She is cursed. And so they sent her away, far from the hills of Umuaya, where drums once beat in her honor, far from the stories in the firelight, and the ancestors who spoke through flame. They banished her to Lagos, a place where horns replaced birdsong. And love came with conditions. In that city of concrete and strangers, she became small, a ghost drifting through her aunt's house, a whisper in a world that never called her name with kindness. But the land never forgot her. Even when everyone else did, the land remembered. Every few moons, a letter would find her, no return address, no stamp, only the trembling handwriting of Papa Connell, and inside, always the same closing words, tucked into each envelope like a prophecy. One day, the land will call you home. You must answer, or everything will be lost. She never understood what it meant, but she never missed a word. She folded those letters like prayers, and kept them hidden beneath her bed, ink smudged with time and tears. Then, one day, came the knock. A man in a suit too sharp for the neighborhood, carrying a folder thick with dust and declarations. "Miss Adaeze Okafor," he said. "You've inherited an entire village." Just like that, the earth beneath her shifted, because this wasn't just about land. It wasn't just inheritance. It was about memory, legacy, power, and a village already locked in a quiet war for its soul. She didn't know it yet, but her return would stir more than just dust. Some would welcome her with open arms, others with knives sharpened by generations of resentment. But the drums of destiny had started, and what they didn't know, what she didn't yet know, was that the battle for Umuaya had just begun. She was born between whispers and warnings, under a sky that rumbled long before the storm began. Her name was Adaeze, but in the beginning, she was just a girl with wide, wondering eyes and a spirit the world was too careless to understand. Her parents, they said, were good people, healers, peacemakers, carriers of old wisdom, the kind of people the village only remembered once they were gone. And gone they were, swallowed in a tragedy that never quite made sense. A crash, they said. But even as a child, she knew that some things fall apart not by accident, but by intention. She stood at their graves with fists clenched and lips trembling, the red soil clinging to her toes like memory. She didn't cry, not because she was strong, but because sorrow had robbed her even of that. The elders said nothing, but the silence around her was not quiet. It hissed. "She is cursed," some whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. And so, before the wound had even scabbed, they sent her away, not to family who loved her, but to relatives who accepted her out of obligation, like a chore passed down. Lagos became her exile. No drums there, no firelight storytelling, no sacred trees or morning libations. Just traffic, concrete, and the tired rituals of survival. Her aunt was the kind of woman who had buried softness a long time ago. Her eyes saw Adaeze, but they never looked at her. Her home was full of rules and empty of warmth. Adaeze learned quickly how to mop floors in silence, how to swallow questions, how to apologize for things that were never her fault. She became a ghost that dusted windows and fetched water, a name only called when something was needed. Her school was a world where she was present but invisible, always a few inches outside the circle. In her heart, she built a fortress of stillness, and it grew tall. But the land, her true land, never let go. Every few moons, a letter would arrive. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from Papa Connell, the old man who had once lifted her onto his lap and told her stories that stretched longer than night. She barely remembered his face, but his words felt like home. The letters were not long, but they carried the weight of generations. "Adaeze," they began. "You are not forgotten." And always they ended with the same haunting promise. One day the land will call you home. You must answer, or everything will be lost. She didn't understand what it meant, not truly, but she never missed a word. She hid each letter beneath her mattress, reading them over and over, the ink smudging as the years passed. As she grew, her questions deepened. Why had she never been brought back for the festivals, the funerals, the naming ceremonies? Why did her bloodline, once so honored, now feel erased? And who, really, was her father, this man who spoke little and kept many secrets? There were nights when she dreamed of fire and shadowy figures. In some dreams, her mother reached for her but vanished just before their fingers touched. In others, she was running through the bush, chased by faceless people who called her name with voices full of malice. In the world outside, she became tall, quiet, and serious. Her teachers called her disciplined, her peers called her strange. But inside, she was a girl building bridges back to a place she barely remembered. The city taught her how to survive, but it never gave her a sense of who she was. Her identity hung like an unfinished sentence. She wore uniforms, ate fast food, memorized the rules of a world that didn't know her lineage. And yet, when the moon was full, she would find a quiet window and stare at it for hours, as if it might whisper something. Because deep down, she believed the land still remembered her name, and one day it would call. The letter arrived like thunder disguised in paper, folded neatly in a worn envelope, delivered not by courier, but by a man in a well-ironed suit who did not belong to the dusty Lagos Street Adaeze called home. He stood with poise, the air around him thick with tradition and tension. "Miss Adaeze Okafor," he said, "you are the sole heir to the late Chief Elisa Okafor's estate, which includes the village of Umuaya." She stared blankly. A village? An entire people? What did it mean to inherit more than land? What did it mean to carry a name that others still feared or honored? When she returned, the village did not cheer. It stared. Eyes followed her through every dusty lane. Some whispered hope, some whispered curses. A few children smiled. One boy ran. Old women crossed themselves. And yet one man welcomed her with open arms, Papa Connell. His eyes knew her, even when she had forgotten herself. He called her daughter of the drum. But not everyone agreed. Madame Ngozi, sharp-tongued and iron-willed, called for proof. "Let her prove herself," she snapped. Blood alone is not enough. They demanded tradition. They called for rights. No one rules where the ancestors have not spoken. As Adaeze immersed herself in village life, drinking from the sacred, spring, dancing in the moonlight, listening to stories carved in elders' wrinkles, she began to remember things she had never known. Chisholm, her childhood friend, now grown and hardened by farming and politics, stood by her side. But behind the laughter, behind the smiles, shadows moved. One night, she found an old journal, her father's. Its pages told of a village sitting on wealth beyond soil, oil, gold, rare herbs, and something older, spiritual power. He had fought to protect it and paid the price. Madame Ngozi, it turned out, had been selling secrets, trading land rights for power. Corporations circled like vultures. Ghosts whispered. The ancestors stirred. The fight was not just legal, it was spiritual. She had to walk fire, give blood, speak to the earth itself. She had to endure poison in her food, lies in her name, fire at her doorstep. Even Chisholm faltered. "Maybe you weren't meant to lead," he said. She left. But only her body, her spirit stayed. Then little Emmy came running with a letter from Papa Kono, hidden under the sacred tree. The truth glowed from the parchment. She returned to the square, lifted her head, and faced them. "You ruled with fear," she told Madame Ngozi. "I will lead with truth." The drums began again. This time, for her, Amuwagia changed, slowly but surely. The well ran clean. The school reopened. The goats no longer ran wild, except one always following Emmy. The land breathed again. Adaeze, now leader, planted a tree where her father once stood. "This," she said, "is for tomorrow." She had come as a stranger. She stayed as a daughter, and she rose as a leader. Because legacy is not what you inherit. It is what you protect, what you rebuild, and what you leave behind. What would you do if you inherited a kingdom? Would you fight to keep it? The bus groaned to a halt at the edge of the village, its tires kicking up the red dust of forgotten stories. As Adaeze stepped down, the sign greeted her with painted words that almost mocked her uncertainty. "Welcome to Umuhiath, land of peace." But the air told a different story. It was thick, not with heat, but with eyes. Curious, cold, watching. Children clung to their mothers. Elders exchanged glances. Whispers followed her like restless spirits. She walked slowly, suitcase in hand, heart pounding like the village drums she hadn't heard since she was a child. She did not recognize the buildings, but the earth beneath her feet hummed like an old lullaby. The silence was loud. Then, from the shadows of a clay compound, a familiar figure stepped forward. Wrinkled hands, back slightly bent, but eyes as clear as the river at dawn. "You've returned," Papa Kono said, arms open. His embrace was dry and strong, like sun-baked wood, and in that moment, something in her exhaled. "You carry your father's silence," he whispered, "and your mother's fire." He brought her to the compound that once belonged to her family. It was older now, cracked in places, but it stood. Inside, she found fragments of her past, a broken mortar, her mother's headscarf, a rusted bell. They held no power alone, but together they sang. That night, a gathering was called. A welcome, though not all came willingly. There were faces that smiled without warmth, nods that came too slow. Among them, a man in polished slippers and a voice that oozed honey and venom. He called himself Counselor Oji, but everyone knew him as Madame Ngozi's shadow, a man who made enemies vanish through paperwork and persuasion. He spoke in riddles, praised the ancestors, and questioned her right to lead in the same breath. But not all was stone. From the crowd, a laugh rang out, Chisholm. He was broader now, sun-darkened, hands calloused, but his grin was still crooked like it had always been. "You still hate palm wine?" he teased. She smiled, a little. He took her to the edge of the village, where the baobab still stood. They sat beneath it as they had once done as children, and for a while time folded. But the peace was brief. That night, after the dance and the food and the fire, a secret meeting was held in the elder's hut. Candles flickered. Names were whispered. Plans were made. Some said she was not the true heir. Some said her blood was tainted by the city. And some, like Madame Ngozi, said nothing at all, just smiled and watched. The village was not ready to be led by a ghost from the past. But Adaeze had not come to beg. She had come to reclaim. And the land, though silent, was listening. It started with a cough in the wall. The sound led her to a crack behind the old family altar, and behind the crack was a box. wrapped in cloth the color of the sky just before it rains. Inside the box lay her father's journal, brittle with age but burning with truth. Adaeze opened it slowly, afraid of what she might find, and more afraid of what she might understand. The pages were heavy with ink and urgency. Her father had written in Igbo English, even in symbols she did not yet recognize. He had chronicled the land, not as a place, but as a being, living, breathing, waiting. Beneath the soil, he wrote, there were more than cassava and yam. There was gold buried in old streams, oil in pockets beneath the sacred grove, herbs that could heal or curse, depending on the hand that used them, and something else, something older, something no company or contractor could ever buy. This land is not just rich, he wrote, it is holy. He had tried to shield it, to protect its soul from exploitation. But whispers of wealth are louder than the wisdom of the dead, and the whispers had reached people who had no business listening. Madame Ngozi had known. That much was now clear. She had stood beside her father at council meetings, smiling in agreement while selling secrets in silence. She had invited foreign companies in, under the guise of progress, corporations with smooth suits and silent deals, government men who arrived with charm and left with deeds. Adaeze flipped through page after page, each one another dagger of betrayal. Her father had fought quietly, using knowledge, not fists. But knowledge had not saved him. In the end, he was buried with his secrets, until now. That night, she went to the sacred grove alone. She thought she was just returning to claim her father's land, but what Adaeze inherited was far more than soil. Beneath the red earth lay a secret buried for generations, one soaked in wealth, betrayal, and blood. Her father died guarding it. Madame Ngozi is ready to kill for it. And the moment Adaeze breaks the seal on that old journal, everything changes. The land will speak, the fire will rise, and Adaeze will have to decide, fight for the truth or watch her people be sold, piece by piece. And that was just the beginning. If you don't want to miss what happens next in this powerful journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We don't just tell stories, we awaken legacies. Stay tuned for the next part. And remember, some stories aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. Subscribe now and walk with us.